Southwestern Utah is perhaps best known as home to one of the nation's most stunning natural wonders, Zion National Park. Here, some of the world's tallest sandstone cliffs rise several thousand feet above the narrow valley floors and cast bold shadows against deep, time-worn canyons. This red rock country still evokes a sense of refuge and sanctuary that originally inspired its name. But just beyond the gates of Zion National Park, sometimes literally within the shadow of the park itself, is a threatened and unprotected piece of America's red rock wilderness, the Zion Mojave Proposed Wilderness. Today, this is perhaps the most threatened region of wild Utah. For Utah Senator Bob Bennett and Congressman Jim Matheson have proposed legislation that would deny protection for the most vulnerable areas of the Zion Mojave Proposed Wilderness. In this corner of southwest Utah, the canyons of the Colorado Plateau meet and mingle with the Mojave Desert to form a landscape rich in natural wonders. Along its eastern edge, the Greater Zion region marks the terminus of the massive sandstone expanse of the Colorado Plateau. More than 150,000 acres of deserving wilderness adjoin and surround protected national park lands. The same forces of nature that shaped the cliffs and valleys of Zion National Park also created intricately carved sandstone canyons, river gorges, and ponderosa-studded plateaus that define the Greater Zion region. Will this landscape remain open and wild much longer? That question is more pressing today than ever before. Southwestern Utah, particularly Washington County, where much of the Zion Mojave is located, is among the fastest growing counties in the nation. The region's red-hot growth is fueling an unprecedented population boom, widespread real estate development, unchecked sprawl, and a host of new pressures on the surrounding Zion Mojave Proposed Wilderness. Balancing the needs of the growing community and the fragile environment may be difficult, but not impossible. Conservationists are proposing a balanced approach. Under America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, the Zion Mojave Proposed Wilderness would achieve lasting protection as congressionally designated wilderness. The protection afforded by the legislation would preserve important habitat for endangered plant and wildlife species, especially the endangered desert tortoise. America's Red Rock Wilderness Act would balance recreation opportunities for motorized and non-motorized backcountry users, preserve open space, and retain growth and transportation options for the local community without infringing on proposed wilderness. In contrast to this long-range view toward our wildlands and our communities, Utah Senator Bob Bennett and Representative Jim Matheson have proposed legislation that would fuel sprawl while denying protection to the most vulnerable Zion Mojave wilderness. 2/3 of the Utah Wilderness Coalition's proposal would be left on the chopping block, and almost 8,000 acres, 12 square miles of Red Rock Canyon Mountain that has been under congressional protection for 2 decades would be open to off-road vehicle use and mining. An entirely new off-road vehicle trail system would be mandated, drawing dirt bike and ATV use from across the West.
This year, Utah Senator Bob Bennett and Representative Jim Matheson introduced legislation which would have drastic and adverse effects on this area. Their legislation, first of all, ignores 2/3 of the wilderness, while it eliminates protection that's been in place for 20 years for some of the areas. It would sell off 25 square miles, a federal land that belongs to all of us, and then the benefits from that would flow to very few. For it takes the money from the sale of the federal lands and gives it, largely is used to subsidize water development in an area that's already suffering from huge amounts of sprawl. It also establishes highway right-of-ways, it establishes an off-road vehicle trail. The legislation would have drastic effects both in terms of the loss of wilderness, loss of federal land that belongs to all of us, and putting sprawl in this area on steroids. It would change this beautiful place in a way I think is even difficult to imagine for generations to come.
Further, the bill creates a loophole to existing law so that some of the money raised by the sales would in turn be handed to the local politicians pushing so fiercely to pass this legislation. And the politicians would be sanctioned to use the money for countless special interest projects, like a water pipeline from Lake Powell, roads, utility corridors, and dams. If passed into law, the proposal by Senator Bennett and Representative Matheson would establish a terrible cycle of dependence, linking the sale of America's public lands to funding for special interest projects and federal agency budget shortfalls. and create an incentive for local politicians in Utah and across the West to push for public land sales. The lobbyists for Washington County have already lined up other Utah counties for similar deals of selling federal lands and undermining wilderness if the Washington County legislation succeeds. The Zion Mojave proposed wilderness is under threat, and therefore so is America's Red Rock Wilderness. Many times before, citizens from across the country have helped protect one of America's most wild natural treasures by expressing their support for Utah wilderness and making their voices heard in Congress. The Zion Mojave proposed wilderness needs this groundswell of support now so that it too can be a place of wild solace for years, decades, and centuries to come. Please contact your members of Congress and urge them to support America's Red Rock Wilderness Act and oppose the Bennett-Matheson legislation that threatens the Zion Mojave Wilderness. You can stay informed by visiting www.sua.org.